I still remember their laughter echoing across Uncle Dave's backyard as my cousin Jack raised his beer bottle in a mocking toast. To Nolan, proud owner of the finest dust and tumbleweeds in Arizona, more laughter. My family couldn't contain their amusement that Grandpa Frank had left his worthless desert property to me while they inherited his stocks, cash, and valuables. That day, I stood alone, clutching the deed to 200 acres of apparent nothingness. I had no idea that within a year, those same relatives would be desperately fighting for a piece of what they once ridiculed. Looking back now, I realize my connection with Grandpa Frank had always been different from what the rest of the family experienced. They saw him as the eccentric old man, the family black sheep who never quite fit in with their country club aspirations. But to me, he was wisdom and authenticity in a world of pretense. I was 28 when Grandpa passed, working a dead-end construction job and living in a small apartment in Phoenix. My cousins had all gone to prestigious colleges and secured high-paying jobs in finance, law, and real estate. Family gatherings typically involved them discussing vacation homes and investment portfolios, while I quietly nursed a beer in the corner. But whenever Grandpa Frank showed up, he would make a beeline straight for me. "How you doing, Nolan?" he would ask, completely ignoring the others' conversations about stock options and property values. "Still building things with your hands? Good. This country needs more makers and fewer paper pushers." He would wink at me while my relatives pretended not to hear. Every summer from when I was 9 until I was 16, I would spend 3 weeks at Grandpa's ranch house, helping him repair fences, tend to his small garden, and camp out on his desert property. We would sleep under the stars, and he would tell me stories about the land. "People look at desert and see nothing," he would say, his weathered face illuminated by our campfire. "They want everything green and obvious. But this land, it keeps its secrets close. The real treasures are hidden from folks who are too lazy or short-sighted to look deeper." I never fully understood what he meant back then. I just knew I loved those nights under the vast Arizona sky, with more stars than I could ever count, and the special feeling that Grandpa was sharing something precious with me that nobody else got to experience. When Grandpa's health began failing, it was me he called. Not my father, not Uncle Dave, not any of his other children who lived much closer than I did. It took me 4 hours to drive to the hospital from Phoenix, and when I arrived, he was already hooked up to various machines, his breathing labored. "There you are, boy," he said when he saw me, his voice barely above a whisper. "I came as fast as I could, Grandpa," I said, taking his hand. It felt so small now, so fragile compared to the strong grip I remembered from my childhood. "Listen to me, Nolan," he said, his eyes suddenly intense despite his weakened state. "I've made arrangements. The lawyers know. That land we camped on, it's going to be yours." "Grandpa, I don't care about inheritances," I told him honestly. "I just want you to get better." He shook his head slightly. "That land holds more value than they'll ever understand. Promise me you'll keep it, no matter what they say." I nodded, not understanding the importance but willing to promise him anything. "I promise, Grandpa." He died 3 days later, with most of the family gathered in the waiting room but only me by his bedside. I watched him take his last breath, feeling like a part of my own soul left with him. The funeral was exactly what Grandpa would have hated. Uncle Dave insisted on a formal church service, despite Grandpa's known preference for simplicity. Relatives he hadn't spoken to in years gave tearful eulogies about a man they barely knew. I sat in the back row, uncomfortable in the only suit I owned, feeling like an imposter in my own family. 2 days after the funeral, we all gathered at the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. The tension in the room was palpable. Grandpa Frank had done well for himself over the years, living simply but investing smartly. Everyone knew there would be a substantial inheritance to divide. Mr. Harrington, the family lawyer, began reading the will methodically. Stocks divided among my father and his siblings, cash accounts split between various cousins, the ranch house and its contents to Aunt Linda. With each announcement, I could see my relatives calculating their windfall, already spending it in their minds. Then Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. "And to my grandson, Nolan Henderson, I leave my 200-acre property in Yucca County, Arizona, parcel number 7438-A, along with all mineral and water rights pertaining to said property. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Uncle Dave laughed. "The desert scrubland? That's it?" Mr. Harrington looked uncomfortable but continued. "Mr. Frank Henderson has left a personal letter for Nolan to be read privately. After the others received their inheritance documents, complete with account numbers and stock certificates, I was handed a simple envelope along with the deed to the property. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Nolan, by now they're all laughing at you getting the worthless desert while they count their money. Let them laugh. You were the only one who ever appreciated that land with me. You have the patience and vision they lack. Keep your promise. Frank Henderson." The comments started almost immediately as we left the lawyer's office. "Tough break, Nolan," said Cousin Travis, slapping me on the back with fake sympathy. His new Rolex glinted in the sunlight. "But hey, if you want to unload that dirt pile, I might take it off your hands. I could probably use it for tax purposes. Say, $10,000? It's not for sale," I said quietly. Travis looked surprised. "Come on, be practical. What are you going to do with 200 acres of nothing? No water, no development potential, not even decent grazing land. It's worthless." "It was important to Grandpa," I replied, trying to end the conversation. 2 weeks later, the family gathered at Uncle Dave's for what was supposed to be a memorial barbecue for Grandpa. Instead, it turned into an opportunity for everyone to discuss their inheritance and what they planned to do with it. Aunt Linda was renovating the ranch house. My father had already traded in his car for a newer model. Cousin Jack was planning a month-long European vacation. "What about you, Nolan?" Uncle Dave asked loudly, drawing everyone's attention, still holding onto that wasteland. I nodded, taking a sip of my beer. "To Nolan," Jack said, raising his bottle in a mock toast, "proud owner of the finest dust and tumbleweeds in Arizona." The laughter spread around the yard, with only a few of the younger cousins having the decency to look embarrassed for me. "I think Grandpa Frank finally lost his marbles at the end," Aunt Susan Stage whispered to my father. "Why else would he give actual valuable assets to everyone else, and that worthless plot to Nolan?" I left early, driving straight to the property. I hadn't visited since Grandpa's passing. It was a 2-hour drive from Phoenix, the last 30 minutes on unpaved roads. As I parked and stepped out into the vast emptiness, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I could see why everyone thought it worthless. It was just desert scrubland, stretching in all directions, dotted with sagebrush and cactus. No water, no structures except for a small, weathered storage shed that Grandpa had built decades ago. But on the other hand, I felt a connection to this place, filled with memories of those starlit conversations with Grandpa. Walking around, I tried to see whatever value he had been so convinced was here. But after an hour of finding nothing but sand, rocks, and the occasional lizard scurrying away from my footsteps, doubt began to creep in. Had Grandpa's mind really been failing at the end? Was I being stubborn for no reason? I decided to check the storage shed before leaving. It was little more than a wooden shack, about 8 feet by 10 feet, with a padlocked door. I used the key Grandpa had given me years ago, surprised that it still worked after all this time. Inside, dust covered everything. Old camping gear, tools, a rusty mini refrigerator that hadn't run in years. I was about to leave when I noticed something odd. The plywood flooring in one corner didn't quite match the rest. Curious, I moved some boxes and saw that a small section, about 2 feet square, had been cut and replaced. Kneeling down, I pried at the edges with a screwdriver I found on a shelf. The section came up, revealing a space underneath and a metal box. I pulled it out, heart racing with unexpected excitement. The box was locked, but after trying various keys from a hook on the wall, I found one that worked. Inside were several items: a leather-bound journal filled with Grandpa's handwriting, detailed maps of the property with strange markings in various locations, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. I opened the envelope and read the note inside. "What lies beneath is worth more than gold. Look where the ravens nest when summer burns hottest." The discovery of Grandpa's hidden box changed everything. I spent that night in my truck at the property, reading his journal by flashlight until the battery died. The pages were filled with observations about the land, geological notes that I barely understood, and repeated references to water where no water should be. One entry from 15 years ago caught my attention. Geological survey team camped on public land a half-mile north. Overheard lead scientist saying underground aquifer likely extends through this region. Government funding cut. Survey abandoned. Fools never look deep enough. The next morning, I called my construction site manager and requested 2 weeks of unpaid leave. I couldn't explain why, but something in Grandpa's writings had lit a fire in me. I needed to understand what he saw in this land that no one else did. I set up a small camp near the storage shed, bringing minimal supplies: a tent, cooler, portable solar charger, and hiking gear. The summer heat was brutal, temperatures soaring well above 100 degrees by midday. I spent those first days systematically exploring the property, using Grandpa's maps as guides, marking off sections as I covered them. The cryptic clue about ravens kept playing in my mind. Look where the ravens nest when summer burns hottest. I noticed that indeed, there were ravens in the area, but finding their nests proved challenging in the vast terrain. A week into my exploration, with my leave from work nearly half gone and nothing to show for it, I was beginning to question my own sanity. Was I chasing ghosts and riddles from an old man's imagination? That evening, as the worst of the day's heat began to subside, I sat outside my tent drinking lukewarm water and contemplating giving up. That's when I noticed something. In the distance, several ravens were circling a particular area. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, they began to land on what looked like a rock formation I hadn't yet explored. It was near the northeast corner of the property, in an area marked with a strange symbol on Grandpa's map. Despite my exhaustion, I grabbed my backpack and set off toward the formation. It was farther than it appeared, and by the time I reached it, the sun was setting. The formation was unusual. A cluster of large boulders arranged almost like a natural shelter, with several narrow openings between them. The ravens had indeed made nests in the crevices. What made this spot unique, I realized, was that it remained shaded during the hottest part of the day due to the arrangement of the rocks. It would be a natural shelter from the brutal summer sun, a place where ravens nest when summer burns hottest. I squeezed through one of the openings into a small clearing at the center of the formation. The ground here felt different somehow. Using the small shovel from my pack, I began to dig. The soil was surprisingly moist compared to the parched earth elsewhere on the property. After digging down about 3 feet, the soil became even damper. Could this be what Grandpa was hinting at? Underground water? But finding moisture wasn't enough to explain his certainty about the land's value. There had to be more. The next morning, I returned to the formation with renewed determination. As I approached, I noticed someone else in the area, setting up what looked like scientific equipment on the adjacent public land. Curious, and a bit protective of my property, I went over to investigate. "Morning," the stranger called out when he saw me approaching. He was about my age, with sun-reddened skin and a geological hammer hanging from his belt. "You're not from the BLM, are you?" "No," I replied. "I own the property next door." "What are you doing here?" He looked relieved. "Thank goodness. I'm Drew Patterson, geologist from Northern Arizona University. Just doing some independent research." He gestured to his equipment. "This area has some fascinating formations. Mind if I ask how long you've owned that land?" "I inherited it recently from my grandfather," I said, not wanting to reveal too much. Drew nodded. "I've been camping out here on and off for the past few months. There's something unusual about the geological structure in this region. Most people think it's just worthless desert, but I have a theory." He trailed off, looking at me as if assessing whether I would understand or care about geological theories. "I'm interested," I said, surprising myself with how true that was. My grandfather seemed to think there was something special about this land, too. Drew's face lit up. He launched into an explanation about basin and range geology, alluvial deposits, and underground water movement that went mostly over my head. But one thing became clear. He believed there could be significant groundwater beneath these seemingly barren lands, possibly a large aquifer that had gone undetected because conventional surveys hadn't explored deeply enough. "The problem is," Drew concluded, "testing that theory would require extensive surveys and deep test drilling. Not the kind of thing a graduate researcher can afford." I thought of the moist soil I'd found near the raven nests. What if I showed you something? Over the next few days, Drew and I became unlikely friends. He was fascinated by Grandpa's journals and maps, saying they showed remarkable geological intuition. Together, we expanded the test hole I'd started, finding that the moisture level continued to increase with depth. "This is promising," Drew said, examining soil samples. "But we need professional equipment to know for sure." My 2 weeks of leave ended, and I returned to my construction job in Phoenix. But my thoughts remained with the property. I began researching groundwater surveys and drilling costs, shocked at the prices quoted by the few companies willing to even consider working in such a remote location. One weekend, I took my entire savings, $3,600, and hired a hydrogeological survey team for a single day of work. They brought ground-penetrating radar and took soil samples, but their report was inconclusive. "There are anomalies consistent with potential groundwater," the lead technician told me, "but without drilling, we can't confirm depth or volume." For the next 2 months, I worked every overtime shift available, sold my TV and most of my furniture, and even picked up weekend landscaping jobs. I put every penny toward a drilling test. Drew helped by convincing one of his professors to provide university equipment at cost, in exchange for using the data for research. When the drilling day finally came, I was a nervous wreck. $18,000, my entire life savings, plus a maxed-out credit card, all riding on what might be an old man's fantasy. We selected a spot based on Grandpa's maps and Drew's research, near the Raven Rock Formation. The drilling crew worked methodically, adding length to their equipment as they went deeper. 100 feet, 200 feet, nothing but dry soil and rock. 300 feet. My heart sank with each passing hour. Most residential wells in this region hit water between 300 and 500 feet, if they hit anything at all. The drilling foreman told me during a break, "We're at 350 now. How much deeper do you want to go?" "Keep going," I said, though each additional foot was costing money I didn't have. At 423 feet, everything changed. "We've hit something," the driller called out. The equipment had punctured what appeared to be a cavern or chamber. When they pulled up the drill, water gushed from the hole with unexpected force. "Whoa!" The foreman rushed to cap the impromptu well. "That's artesian pressure. There's a confined aquifer down there under significant pressure." Drew was ecstatic, taking samples of the water as it flowed. "This is incredible, Nolan. Do you understand what this means? You've got a self-pressurized aquifer. No pumping required." Initial water quality tests performed by Drew's portable equipment showed something even more surprising. The water was exceptionally pure, with unusual mineral content. "These mineral levels," Drew muttered, checking his results twice. "This isn't just water, Nolan. This is potentially therapeutic mineral water, the kind people pay premium prices for." I stood there, watching water flow from the parched desert floor, remembering Grandpa's words. That land holds more value than they'll ever understand. For the first time, I began to understand what he had known all along. The euphoria of discovering water quickly gave way to the harsh reality of development costs. With my savings depleted by the test drilling, I had no resources to capitalize on the find. I approached 3 different banks with my water test results and Drew's enthusiastic geological assessment. All 3 turned me down. "Mr. Henderson," said the loan officer at the 3rd bank, barely glancing at my documents, "while your discovery is interesting, developing water rights in remote desert property requires substantial capital investment. Without collateral or a proven business model, we can't justify the risk." I left the bank feeling defeated. That night, in my increasingly empty apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. I put my apartment up for sale, liquidated my small 401k despite the penalties, and purchased a used trailer to live in on the property. If banks wouldn't fund my dream, I would bootstrap it myself, one step at a time. Living on the land was harder than I anticipated. No electricity except what my small solar setup could provide. No running water except what I could haul in until I developed the well. Summer days were scorching, winter nights freezing. But every morning, I would look at the test well, seeing the water that flowed from it as proof that Grandpa's faith in me wasn't misplaced. With my remaining funds, I hired a local contractor to properly cap the test well and install a simple plumbing system so I could use the water. Drew continued to visit whenever his university schedule allowed, helping me plan next steps while using the site for his graduate research. "You should present at the Southwest Water Resources Conference," Drew suggested during one of his visits. "It's mostly academics and industry people, but someone might see the potential here." The conference was in Tucson the following month. I spent every evening preparing a presentation, teaching myself about hydrology and aquifer management from library books and online resources. My construction background gave me enough technical vocabulary to not sound completely amateur, but I still felt out of my depth. On the day of the conference, I wore the same suit from Grandpa's funeral, the only one I owned. My presentation was scheduled for the last session of the day, when many attendees had already left. Only about 20 people remained in the room as I nervously clicked through my slides, explaining the discovery and showing water quality tests. Most faces showed polite disinterest. A few were openly skeptical, but one woman in the back was taking detailed notes. After the sparsely attended Q&A session, as I was gathering my materials, she approached me. "Your aquifer's mineral composition is fascinating," she said, handing me her card. "Allison Reeves, Agricultural Engineering, University of Arizona." Allison specialized in desert agriculture and water efficiency systems. She asked detailed questions about the water pressure, volume estimates, and mineral content that Drew had identified. "Would you be open to me visiting your site?" she asked. "I'd like to run some additional tests." 2 weeks later, Allison arrived at the property with a truck full of equipment. She was methodical, taking multiple water samples and conducting soil analysis in various locations. "The mineral composition in this water is unlike anything I've worked with," she said as we sat outside my trailer that evening, reviewing her preliminary findings. "High in magnesium, zinc, and several trace minerals that are incredibly beneficial for plant growth, and the purity level is remarkable for groundwater." "What could I do with it?" I asked. "With the right irrigation system, you could grow high-value, water-intensive crops even in this desert environment. The mineral content would reduce or eliminate the need for certain fertilizers." She looked around at the barren landscape. "It would be challenging and expensive to set up, but the results could be extraordinary." Allison's assessment gave me new direction. Over the next month, I developed a business plan for small-scale, high-value crop production using my water resources. I maxed out 2 more credit cards purchasing basic irrigation equipment and heirloom vegetable seeds known to benefit from mineral-rich water. Using my construction skills, I built a simple irrigation system covering 1 acre near my trailer. Allison consulted via phone, guiding me on optimal watering patterns and crop selection. The work was backbreaking 16-hour days of digging trenches, laying pipes, preparing soil beds, all while still taking occasional construction jobs in Phoenix to keep minimal cash flowing. 3 months later, my first test crops emerged. The results were remarkable. Tomatoes grew larger and more flavorful than any I'd tasted. Leafy greens were vibrant and nutrient-dense. Local soil combined with the mineral-rich water created produce of exceptional quality. I began selling at the farmer's market in the nearest town, 30 miles away. My desert bloom produce quickly gained a reputation among local chefs and health-conscious consumers. It wasn't much income, but it validated the concept. With this small success, I expanded to 3 acres, reinvesting every dollar earned. Drew continued his research on the property, bringing university equipment that I could never afford to buy. One Saturday, while expanding the irrigation system to the northeast section of the property, my shovel hit something unusual, not the typical rock or hardpan soil, but something that left black streaks on the metal blade. I dug out a handful of the strange black rocks and set them aside to show Drew on his next visit. When Drew saw them 2 weeks later, his reaction was immediate and dramatic. "Where exactly did you find these?" he demanded, examining the rocks with uncharacteristic intensity. I showed him the location, where I had now exposed a significant deposit of the black material just a few feet below the surface. "Nolan," Drew said slowly. "Do you have any idea what these are?" I shook my head. "These appear to be manganese nodules with possible rare earth elements mixed in. We'd need lab testing to confirm, but if I'm right, He looked at me, excitement clear in his eyes. These minerals are critical components in batteries, electronics, renewable energy technology. They're in extremely high demand globally, and domestic sources are limited. You're saying these rocks are valuable? I asked, struggling to process this new development. Potentially extremely valuable, Drew corrected. Let me take samples to the university lab. If these contain what I think they do, you're sitting on a dual-resource gold mine: water and strategic minerals. The lab results came back 2 weeks later, confirming Drew's suspicions. The black rocks contained a mixture of manganese, cobalt, and several rare earth elements used in high-tech manufacturing. A second major discovery on property my family had mocked as worthless. Grandpa's journal now made more sense. He had suspected both water and minerals, but lacked the resources to prove either. Instead, he'd left careful clues for someone with the patience and determination to find them. He had chosen me because he believed I possessed those qualities. With 2 proven resources, my business plan evolved dramatically. I now faced the complex challenge of developing both agricultural and mining operations simultaneously, each requiring different permits, equipment, and expertise. Allison introduced me to sustainable farming communities who shared knowledge about desert agriculture. Drew connected me with the university's Mineral Resources Department, who provided guidance on responsible extraction practices. But funding remained a critical issue. Banks still considered the venture too risky, despite the proven resources. Every penny from produce sales went back into development, but progress was painfully slow. I lived on ramen noodles and worked from sunrise to well past sunset, fueled by determination and Grandpa's belief in me. The breakthrough came 8 months after the water discovery. A technology manufacturer searching for domestic sources of rare earth minerals found me through Drew's academic connections. After extensive testing and site visits, they offered an advance purchase agreement for minerals, providing enough capital to properly develop the mining operation. With actual contracts in hand, a regional bank finally approved a business development loan. Almost overnight, my financial situation transformed from desperate to promising. The next 6 months passed in a blur of activity. With proper funding, I hired a small team of local workers, many from struggling nearby communities. We established proper extraction facilities for the minerals and expanded the agricultural operation to 20 acres of high-value crops. Balancing the 2 operations required careful planning. I insisted on environmentally responsible practices for both, using the mineral extraction proceeds to fund state-of-the-art water-efficient farming technologies. The unique combination of ventures drew attention from sustainability publications and regional business journals. Drew joined the business full-time as our geological consultant after completing his PhD, his dissertation having been based largely on studies of my property. Allison remained an advisor, while keeping her university position, helping us implement innovative desert farming techniques. By the 1-year anniversary of the water discovery, Desert Bloom Enterprises had transformed from a one-man operation into a thriving business with 22 employees. The agricultural side produced premium organic produce for restaurants and specialty markets across the Southwest. The mineral operation supplied strategic elements to technology and battery manufacturers under long-term contracts. A renewable energy company approached us about installing solar panels on portions of the property not being used for agriculture or mining, adding a third revenue stream. With their investment, we built proper facilities including offices, staff housing, and a processing center for both produce and minerals. When a regional business magazine ran a feature titled Desert Bloom, How One Man's Worthless Inheritance Became a Multi-million-dollar Enterprise, the story went viral in business circles. Suddenly, investors who had previously declined meetings were calling daily. Technology companies interested in securing mineral supplies sent representatives. Agricultural conglomerates expressed interest in partnerships. The property's valuation, once dismissed as worthless, now exceeded $50 million according to conservative estimates. My personal net worth on paper had gone from -5 figures to 8 figures in just over a year. Through it all, I had no contact with my family. After their initial mockery, I had pulled away, focusing entirely on developing the property. They made no attempts to reach out, and I made none either. That changed in November, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Nolan? It's Aunt Susan. We've been thinking about you with Thanksgiving coming up. Would you like to join us at Uncle Dave's this year? The invitation came out of nowhere, after nearly 18 months of silence. My first instinct was to decline, but something in me wanted closure, perhaps even a chance to show them that Grandpa had been right about me all along. "I'll be there," I said simply. Thanksgiving at Uncle Dave's was surreal. The same house, the same people, but the dynamic had shifted dramatically. Instead of being the invisible cousin in the corner, I was suddenly the center of attention. "Nolan, great to see you," Uncle Dave boomed, clapping me on the shoulder as if we'd been close all along. "Heard your business is doing well. Always knew that property had potential." I bit my tongue, remembering clearly his mocking toast at the memorial barbecue. Around the table, relatives who had laughed at my inheritance now asked detailed questions about the business with forced casualness. "So what's the operation worth these days?" Cousin Travis asked, while passing the mashed potatoes. "Ballpark figure." "Hard to say exactly," I replied noncommittally. "We're still developing. Must be nice to strike it rich on dumb luck," Uncle Peter commented with a tight smile. "It wasn't luck," I corrected him. "Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing when he left me that land, and it took a year of back-breaking work before we showed any profit." Aunt Linda changed the subject, asking about my personal life with exaggerated interest. "Are you seeing anyone special? You know, Susan's daughter Madison just moved back to Phoenix after finishing law school." After dinner, as people moved to the living room for football and dessert, Uncle Peter cornered me in the hallway. He had been the most financially successful family member before my business took off, a fact he had never let anyone forget. "Nolan, got a minute? I've been thinking about your operation. Very impressive for someone with no business background." "Thanks," I said cautiously. "Thing is, with my experience and connections, I could really help you take it to the next level. I've prepared some thoughts." He handed me a folder containing what looked like a formal business proposal. "Families should stick together in business, don't you think?" Before I could respond, Aunt Susan and Cousin Travis joined us. "We've been talking, Nolan," Susan said. "It's wonderful what you've done with Frank's property, but really, it should benefit the whole family." Travis nodded. "We've put together some investment proposals. We'd all contribute capital for expansion, in exchange for appropriate ownership stakes." I flipped through Uncle Peter's folder, seeing a proposal that would grant him 40% ownership for a relatively small investment. "I'm not looking for investors right now." Uncle Peter's friendly demeanor slipped. "Be reasonable, Nolan. That was family land. Frank would have wanted us all to benefit." He lowered his voice. "The reality is, we're talking about significant resources that should rightfully be shared among all of Frank's descendants. Grandpa chose to leave the property specifically to me," I pointed out. "About that," Travis interjected. "We've been going through Grandpa's papers. He actually mentioned wanting the land to benefit everyone." He pulled out a typed letter. "See? He writes about family land for the family's benefit." I examined the letter. It was typed on what appeared to be Grandpa's letterhead, but several things stood out immediately. The date was after he had been hospitalized, when he could barely hold a pen, let alone type. And the signature looked wrong, not Grandpa's distinctive scrawl that I knew from birthday cards and his journal. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "It was with his papers," Travis said vaguely. "The point is, he clearly intended for the family to share in any benefits from the property. Then why didn't he put that in his legal will?" I challenged. Uncle Peter's expression hardened. "Frank wasn't in his right mind toward the end. We all know that. He didn't understand the implications of leaving valuable property to just one person. He knew exactly what he was doing," I said firmly, handing back the suspicious letter. "And this conversation is over. I need to head back. Early morning tomorrow." As I walked toward the door, Uncle Peter called after me. "Think about it, Nolan. We're prepared to take a 50% stake and handle all the business aspects. You could just relax and enjoy the profits. Or things could get complicated." I turned back. "Is that a threat?" He shrugged, just pointing out that legal challenges to wills can be messy and expensive. As family, we should be able to work something out privately. I left without another word. My brief hope for reconciliation shattered. During the drive back to my property, I realized this wouldn't be the end of it. My family, who had laughed at my worthless inheritance, now wanted to claim what I had built through vision and hard work, simply because it had become valuable. In their minds, my success couldn't possibly be deserved. It had to be luck or some kind of mistake that needed correcting. The fact that Grandpa had specifically chosen me and that I had risked everything to develop the property meant nothing to them. I called my lawyer first thing the next morning. If they wanted a fight, I would be prepared. The family's demands escalated quickly after Thanksgiving. First came emails from Uncle Peter with revised partnership proposals, still demanding substantial ownership, but now couched in language about avoiding unfortunate legal conflicts within the family. When I didn't respond, Cousin Travis called, his tone alternating between cajoling and veiled threats. "We don't want things to get ugly, Nolan. But Uncle Peter is pretty set on this. He's got connections with some serious lawyers." I remained firm in my refusal, which triggered the next phase of their campaign. Aunt Susan began contacting mutual acquaintances and distant relatives, spreading a narrative that I had somehow tricked Grandpa Frank in his final days, manipulating him into changing his will. "It's just not right," she told anyone who would listen. Poor Frank was confused at the end, and Nolan took advantage. Now he's hoarding the family legacy, all for himself. I tried to ignore the rumors, focusing instead on growing the business. We were in negotiations with several major technology companies for expanded mineral contracts, and our agricultural operation was preparing to double in size with new greenhouse technologies that would allow year-round production. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, a certified letter arrived from a prestigious Phoenix law firm. It formally demanded that I recognize the rightful familial interest in Frank Henderson's property and transfer 60% ownership to a family trust to be managed by Uncle Peter and his selected advisors. The letter claimed Grandpa had lacked testamentary capacity when making his will and alleged that I had exerted undue influence over him. It concluded with a threat of formal legal proceedings if I didn't comply within 30 days. My lawyer, Sarah Jimenez, reviewed the letter with concern. "They're serious about this, Nolan. This firm doesn't make idle threats. Contesting a will based on mental capacity is difficult to prove after the fact, but defending against it can be extraordinarily expensive and time-consuming." "What about the fake letter they showed me?" I asked. "That has to be fraud. If we can prove they created a fraudulent document, that would significantly undermine their case," Sarah agreed. "But right now, it's your word against theirs about where the letter came from." The legal threat created immediate practical problems. When our investors and business partners heard about the potential ownership dispute, many became hesitant to proceed with pending agreements. 2 technology companies paused negotiations for mineral contracts, citing concerns about ownership uncertainty. The bank that had provided our development loan requested an urgent meeting to discuss potential collateral issues related to disputed property rights. Our expansion plans were suddenly in jeopardy, along with the jobs of the employees who depended on our continued growth. I called an emergency meeting with Drew, Allison, and our core management team to address the situation. "We can't let this derail everything we've built," I told them, spreading out the legal documents on our conference table. "We need to fight this while keeping the business moving forward." Drew had become more than a business partner over the past year. He was a true friend who had believed in the property's potential when no one else did. "This is outrageous," he said, reading through the legal letter. "They laughed at you when they thought the land was worthless, and now they want to steal what you've built." Allison, practical as always, focused on immediate steps. "We should document everything about Grandpa Frank's mental state. Medical records, witnesses who saw him in his final months, prove he knew exactly what he was doing." We developed a 2-pronged strategy, legally defending against the family's claims while reassuring our business partners and employees about the company's stability. I drained my personal accounts to pay the substantial retainer for a specialized estate litigation attorney to work alongside Sarah. Meanwhile, the family escalated their tactics. Uncle Peter contacted several of our mineral customers directly, implying that they should reconsider their contracts due to imminent changes in ownership and management. Cousin Travis was spotted meeting with representatives from Westridge Resources, our main competitor in the specialty minerals market. Most disturbingly, Aunt Susan began telling people that Grandpa had been diagnosed with dementia in his final year, a complete fabrication that I could disprove with medical records. but one that planted seeds of doubt among those who didn't know the details. The stress began taking a physical toll. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and found myself constantly checking the property boundaries for signs of intrusion. Security cameras caught Travis and Uncle Peter walking the northeastern section of the property one night, with men carrying surveying equipment and what appeared to be water testing kits. When confronted by our security staff, they claimed to be just visiting family land and left immediately. But the purpose seemed clear. They were mapping the locations of our mineral deposits and water access points. Our investigators discovered that Westridge Resources had recently acquired 200 acres of land adjacent to our property. The timing and location couldn't be coincidental. If my family succeeded in disrupting our operations, Westridge would be positioned to move in and potentially access our aquifer. The situation reached a breaking point when we received formal notice that the family had filed their lawsuit in Arizona Superior Court, requesting an emergency injunction to prevent any alienation or encumbrance of disputed assets, essentially freezing our ability to develop the property while the case proceeded. Our attorneys responded immediately, but warned that courts often grant temporary injunctions until ownership can be definitively established. If granted, the injunction would cripple our operations at a critical growth phase. That night, I sat alone in Grandpa's old storage shed, which we had preserved as a memorial of sorts. The business had expanded around it, with modern facilities and equipment now surrounding the humble wooden structure where my journey had begun. The weight of defending his legacy and my own work felt crushing. Had I missed something? Was there anything else Grandpa might have left that could help prove his intentions? As I sat in contemplation, I noticed the old wooden chair in the corner, Grandpa's favorite, where he would sit during our camping trips, telling stories as darkness fell. It had always wobbled slightly. Without thinking, I reached down to check if the uneven leg could be tightened. As I tilted the chair, something felt off about its weight distribution. Examining it more closely, I noticed that the seat had been constructed from 2 pieces of wood, not one as I had always assumed. The seam was nearly invisible with years of wear and patina, but it was definitely there. Heart racing, I carefully turned the chair upside down and examined the underside. There was a small notch in one corner, just big enough for a fingertip. When I pressed it, I heard a soft click. The seat panel popped up slightly, revealing a hidden compartment within the chair's frame. Inside was a waterproof metal container about the size of a thick book. With shaking hands, I opened it. The contents nearly took my breath away. Inside was Grandpa's original will, not a copy, but the actual document with original signatures and notary seal. Unlike the version filed with Mr. Harrington, this one contained an additional page with a detailed explanation of his decision to leave the property specifically to me. I leave my desert property to my grandson, Nolan Henderson, because he alone among my descendants possesses the patience, vision, and character to recognize its true value. I have intentionally not disclosed my geological surveys or water rights research to my other children and grandchildren, as they have repeatedly demonstrated interest only in immediate financial gain, without appreciation for long-term value or stewardship of the land. Also in the container was a USB drive and a set of letters from various family members dating back 15 years. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop and discovered it contained audio recordings of conversations Grandpa had with several family members, including Uncle Peter, Aunt Susan, and Cousin Travis. In one recording from 7 years earlier, Grandpa offered to give the property to Uncle Peter, who laughed and replied, "What would I do with useless desert? Give me something I can sell." Another recording captured Travis saying, "That worthless dirt pile? No thanks, Grandpa. I'll take cash or stocks instead when you kick the bucket." The letters told a similar story, years of family members dismissing the property as worthless and explicitly refusing Grandpa's offers to involve them in its development. Most damning of all was a recent voice recording, apparently made when Grandpa was in the hospital. It captured Uncle Peter and Aunt Susan discussing how to convince Grandpa to change his will regarding his liquid assets, with Peter saying, "Let him keep the desert property in his will. No one wants that worthless land anyway. We just need to make sure the real assets come to us." I sat there stunned, holding concrete evidence that not only had Grandpa been of sound mind when making his will, but that the family had explicitly rejected the property when offered, and were now attempting fraud to claim it only after it proved valuable. I called Sarah immediately. I found something that changes everything. The courtroom was packed on the day of the preliminary injunction hearing. My entire family occupied one side, looking confident as they conferred with their team of attorneys from Peterson, Goldstein, and Walsh, one of Arizona's most prestigious law firms. On our side sat Sarah Jimenez, our lead attorney Richard Blackwell, and me. We had deliberately kept our discovery of Grandpa's hidden evidence quiet, filing it with the court but requesting it remain sealed until the hearing. Judge Eleanor Martinez called the court to order. We're here on the matter of Henderson et al. Versus Henderson, petition for emergency injunction, and will contest. She glanced at the thick file before her. Quite the family dispute we have here. The family's lead attorney, Merrill Peterson, presented their case first, spinning a compelling narrative about a confused elderly man manipulated by his grandson, resulting in a gross miscarriage of familial justice. Your Honor, Peterson concluded, the evidence will show that Frank Henderson lacked testamentary capacity when he inexplicably left valuable property to only one grandchild, bypassing his own children and other grandchildren. We have multiple witnesses prepared to testify about Mr. Henderson's declining mental state in his final months. He gestured toward my family, who nodded solemnly on cue. Additionally, we have documentary evidence suggesting Mr. Henderson's true intention was for this property to benefit the entire family. Judge Martinez turned to our table. Mr. Blackwell, your response to the petition? Richard stood, his expression calm. Your Honor, we not only oppose the injunction, but move for immediate dismissal of the entire case based on new evidence that conclusively establishes Frank Henderson's intentions and mental capacity. He nodded to Sarah, who approached with our sealed evidence package. Furthermore, Richard continued, we have evidence suggesting the petitioners have engaged in attempted fraud upon this court by presenting fabricated documents and false testimony. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Uncle Peter leaned forward, whispering urgently to Peterson. Judge Martinez examined the sealed evidence. Mr. Peterson, did you have any knowledge of these materials prior to filing? Peterson looked uncomfortable. No, Your Honor. This appears to be a last-minute attempt to introduce unverified evidence. The evidence has been authenticated, Richard countered. The audio recordings have been verified by forensic analysts, and the notarized will include the original notary's contact information, who has provided an affidavit confirming Mr. Henderson's sound mental state at signing. Judge Martinez spent several minutes reviewing the materials, her expression growing increasingly serious. Finally, she looked up, her gaze moving between both sides of the courtroom. I'm going to take a 30-minute recess to review these materials more thoroughly. When we return, I want to hear directly from the parties involved. She stood abruptly. Court is in recess. During the break, I watched my family huddled with their legal team, gesturing animatedly, as Peterson repeatedly shook his head. Whatever strategy they had arrived with was clearly unraveling. When court resumed, Judge Martinez addressed the room with a stern expression. Having reviewed the evidence submitted, I find several matters deeply troubling. She turned to the family's table. Mr. Peterson, the recording submitted appears to directly contradict your client's sworn statements regarding their prior knowledge of and interest in the property in question. She held up the USB drive. Furthermore, the alleged letter from Frank Henderson indicating his wish for family distribution, which your client submitted as Exhibit C, appears to have been created after Mr. Henderson was hospitalized and physically incapable of typing or signing such a document. Uncle Peter shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Aunt Susan stared at the floor. Before ruling on the injunction, I want to hear directly from the parties. The judge pointed to Uncle Peter. Mr. Henderson, please approach the witness stand. Under oath and faced with the recordings of his own voice, Uncle Peter's confident facade crumbled. He admitted that they had only become interested in the property after learning of its commercial success. Travis, when called to testify, could not explain how the letter allegedly written by Grandpa contained references to events that occurred after Grandpa had been hospitalized. When pressed, he admitted that Uncle Peter had recreated what they believed Grandpa would have wanted. By the time testimony concluded, the family's case had completely fallen apart. Judge Martinez not only denied their injunction, but dismissed the entire case with prejudice, meaning they could not refile on the same grounds. Furthermore, she added, looking directly at my family, the court finds the petitioner's actions in presenting falsified evidence troubling. Mr. Henderson, she nodded to me, is entitled to recover all reasonable legal fees from the petitioners. I am also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential perjury charges. As we left the courtroom, the family and their attorneys hurried past without making eye contact. Only my youngest cousin, Josh, approached me briefly. "I'm sorry, Nolan," he said quietly. "I told them this wasn't right." The legal victory was decisive, but the damage to our business momentum had already been significant. Several deals had fallen through during the uncertainty, and our expansion plans were months behind schedule. Still, with ownership now firmly established beyond challenge, we could resume our growth strategy with renewed confidence. Within 2 weeks, we filed our own lawsuit against Westridge Resources for their role in the attempted theft, presenting evidence of their collusion with Uncle Peter and Travis to undermine our operations. The publicity surrounding the case ultimately worked in our favor. Our commitment to fighting for what was rightfully ours resonated with customers and partners who valued integrity. Several companies that had paused negotiations returned to the table with improved offers, preferring to work with a business that had proven its resilience. 3 months after the court victory, Desert Bloom Enterprises completed a major expansion of both its agricultural operations and mineral extraction facilities. Our workforce grew to over 50 employees, many from economically disadvantaged communities in the region. The property's valuation exceeded $55 million, with projected annual revenues approaching $12 million. We established the Frank Henderson Foundation, dedicated to supporting sustainable land development, education, and young entrepreneurs facing financial barriers. It seemed a fitting tribute to the man who had seen potential where others saw nothing of value. Some family members, particularly the younger cousins like Josh, who had played no role in the attempted theft, cautiously reached out with genuine apologies. After careful consideration, I began rebuilding relationships with those who demonstrated sincere remorse, though trust would take much longer to restore. One evening, as the desert sun set in spectacular fashion, Allison and I stood on the highest point of the property, overlooking what had become a thriving enterprise. The barren land now featured efficient greenhouses, carefully managed extraction facilities, and a growing complex of support buildings, all developed with environmental sustainability as a core principle. "Your grandfather would be proud," Allison said, slipping her hand into mine. Our professional relationship had gradually evolved into something deeper over the months of working closely together. I nodded, thinking of the journals, maps, and cryptic clues that had led me on this journey. He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, the patience to look deeper, the persistence to keep going when everyone else gave up. The desert stretched out before us, bathed in golden light. To most, it still appeared as empty wilderness, but I had learned to see the extraordinary value hidden beneath the ordinary surface, a lesson that extended far beyond land and resources. "You know," I said, "the real inheritance wasn't the land itself. It was learning to recognize that value isn't always obvious. Success comes to those who have faith in themselves when no one else believes, and that who you truly are is revealed both in adversity and in prosperity." Allison squeezed my hand. "And family isn't always defined by blood." I thought about Drew, Allison, and the team who had stood by me through the darkest moments, contrasted with the relatives who had mocked, then tried to steal what I had built. "No," I agreed. "Sometimes it's defined by who believes in you when everyone else is laughing." As darkness fell, the lights of our operation began to illuminate the once empty desert. A fitting metaphor, I thought, for how Grandpa's faith and my persistence had transformed apparent nothingness into something of true and lasting value. 2 years after the court victory, Desert Bloom Enterprises had transformed beyond anything I could have imagined when I first stood alone on that worthless land clutching a deed that no one else wanted. Our agricultural division now included 30 acres of advanced greenhouse facilities, producing year-round organic crops that commanded premium prices in markets across the Southwest and California. The natural minerals in our water created produce with exceptional flavor profiles that chefs and health-conscious consumers consistently praised. The mineral extraction operation had become a key domestic supplier of rare earth elements for technology manufacturers, with long-term contracts ensuring stability. We had pioneered environmentally responsible extraction methods that minimized impact while maximizing yield, setting new industry standards that larger companies were beginning to adopt. The third arm of the business, renewable energy, had expanded to include a solar farm that powered our operations with excess capacity sold back to the grid. We were completely energy independent and carbon neutral, facts that enhanced our brand value in an increasingly environmentally conscious marketplace. What had begun as my desperate attempt to honor Grandpa's final wish had grown into an enterprise valued at over $75 million, employing more than 80 people from surrounding communities and generating substantial economic activity in a previously neglected region. The legal aftermath of the family's attempted theft continued to unfold. The district attorney had declined to pursue criminal charges against Uncle Peter and Travis, but our civil case against Westridge Resources resulted in a substantial settlement after evidence emerged of their knowing participation in the scheme to undermine our operations and potentially access our water resources. Uncle Peter and Aunt Susan had moved to Florida shortly after the court defeat, effectively cutting ties with the extended family. Travis had made several awkward attempts to reconcile, claiming he had been just following Uncle Peter's lead, but his apologies rang hollow and self-serving. The younger generation of the family had taken different paths. Cousin Josh had genuinely apologized and demonstrated his sincerity by refusing to participate in family discussions about challenging the court's decision. Several other young cousins had reached out independently, acknowledging the wrongness of what had happened and seeking to rebuild relationships. After careful consideration, I had established limited contact with those showing genuine remorse. Trust would take years to rebuild, but I refused to perpetuate endless family division when some were sincerely trying to make amends. On a crisp October morning, almost 3 years to the day since Grandpa Frank had passed, we held the official opening ceremony for the Frank Henderson Innovation Center, a research facility built on the property dedicated to advancing sustainable desert agriculture and responsible resource development. The governor cut the ribbon while local and national media covered the event. Representatives from the university, environmental organizations, and business partners joined our employees for the celebration. It was a powerful moment of vindication, seeing a place once dismissed as worthless desert recognized as a hub of innovation and sustainable development. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me somewhat hesitantly. It took me a moment to recognize Madison, Aunt Susan's daughter, whom I hadn't seen since before the legal battle. "Hi, Nolan," she said. "Congratulations on everything you've accomplished here. It's truly remarkable." "Thank you," I replied, unsure of her intentions. "I want you to know that I never agreed with what they tried to do," she said, her voice sincere. "I told Mom it was wrong from the beginning, but no one would listen." She handed me an envelope. "I found this while cleaning out some of Grandpa's books that ended up at our house. I thought you should have it." Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before. Grandpa and me sitting by a campfire on the property when I was about 12. On the back, in Grandpa's handwriting, "Nolan gets it, the only one who sees with the right eyes." "Thank you for this," I said, genuinely moved. Madison smiled sadly. "I'm sorry for everything that happened. Some of us are trying to be better than that." That evening, I hosted a small dinner at my home on the property, the modest but comfortable house I had built to replace the trailer after the business took off. Drew and his fiancée were there, along with Allison, who had become much more than a business partner over the past year, and a few key team members who had been with me since the early days. As we enjoyed a meal featuring produce from our own greenhouses, the conversation turned to the journey we had all shared. "Remember when the first water sample came back and I thought my equipment was malfunctioning?" Drew laughed. "I'd never seen mineral content like that in natural groundwater. And remember sleeping in your truck for those first 3 months because we couldn't afford proper facilities?" Allison added, squeezing my hand. "Or when the bank manager finally approved our first real loan after turning us down 4 times. I shook my head at the memory. His face when he finally visited the property and saw what we were doing. Later, as everyone moved to the patio to enjoy the spectacular desert sunset, I found myself standing beside the photograph Madison had returned to me. Grandpa's words resonated deeply. the only one who sees with the right eyes. That had been his true gift to me, not just the land, but the perspective to see potential where others saw nothing, to recognize that value often lies hidden beneath the surface, whether in property, in opportunities, or in people, and to understand that true worth comes not from what you're given, but what you build through vision, perseverance, and integrity. The company had recently received an acquisition offer from a major agricultural conglomerate, an eye-watering 9-figure sum that would have made me wealthy beyond imagination. I had declined. This wasn't just a business to be sold to the highest bidder. It was a legacy, a testament to Grandpa's faith in me, and the culmination of countless hours of sweat and struggle. My family had initially seen only worthless desert and then, when proven wrong, had tried to take what they hadn't earned. They had failed to understand that the true value was never just in the water or minerals, but in the vision to see possibilities and the character to bring them to life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of orange and purple, I thought about the extraordinary journey from that day in Uncle Dave's backyard, enduring their mocking laughter, to now. The land that no one wanted had become a thriving enterprise that everyone sought to claim. The grandson they had dismissed had built something they couldn't take away, but the greatest triumph wasn't the financial success or even the legal victory. It was the knowledge that I had honored Grandpa's belief in me, transformed his vision into reality, and created something of lasting value not just for myself but for an entire community. The desert darkness brought out the stars, countless points of light in the vast Arizona sky, just like during those camping trips with Grandpa years ago. Some things had come full circle, while others had changed forever. But through it all, through doubt and struggle, through betrayal and vindication, I had kept my promise to the one person who had truly believed in me. And that, I realized, was worth more than all the water, minerals, and success combined. What would you do if you inherited something others thought worthless? Would you have the patience and vision to discover its hidden value? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more content like this, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that value isn't always obvious at first glance. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that sometimes the greatest treasures are found where others see nothing but desert.